Whenever I start to tell my story, people look at me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. I completely understand. I would be skeptical too if I hadn't lived through every moment I'm going to share here. My name is Cassidy Rowen. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas, in a simple house in the south of the city. I've always been that kind of person you meet every day at the supermarket or in line at the bank. Nothing special, you know?
I work as an administrative assistant in an accounting firm. I have a cat called Milo, and my idea of a perfect evening has always been a good book and a cup of tea. You should write a book about this, Cassidy. My friend Sarah always insists when I tell my story. But no, I'm not a writer, nor a motivational speaker, nor a spiritual leader. I'm just someone who has experienced something extraordinary and feels like I need to share it.
It all started in 2009, a year that changed my life forever. My mother, who had always been a strong and full-of-life woman, began to waste away before my eyes. The pain in her knees prevented her from doing the simplest things, like climbing stairs or walking to the garden that she loved so much. But the worst was the depression, a dark shadow that seemed to suck all the light from his eyes. I remember our last conversation perfectly. It was dusk, and she was sitting in her favorite armchair, the blue velvet one worn by time. "I'm moving in with Aunt Margaret," she announced, without looking directly at me. "Mom, please. You know it's not a good idea," I argued, feeling my heart sink. "Aunt Margaret can barely take care of herself with all this drinking problem." "You don't understand, Cassidy," she replied, her voice shaking. "I need a change. I can't stand feeling this way anymore." The argument escalated quickly. Harsh words were exchanged. Tears were shed. If I had known it would be our last conversation, well, I would have done everything differently. The next morning, when the silence in his room seemed too heavy for me, I felt something strange in the air. I knocked on the door once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. When I finally entered, the scene I encountered was forever etched in my memory. She was lying on her bed, looking strangely at peace, a cross held tightly between her fingers, and an empty pill bottle on the bedside table. The days that followed were a blur of sad faces, empty hugs, and words of comfort that failed to reach the depth of my pain. During the funeral, I found myself watching the blue Austin sky, thinking how unfair it was that the world was still so beautiful when my mother was no longer here to see it. It was after this that strange things started to happen. First, it was little things. A book that appeared in a different place than where I had left it. Her perfume that seemed to hang in the air even months later. The sound of footsteps in the hallway when I was home alone. At the time, I thought I was just projecting my longing onto random coincidences. But now I know it was just the beginning of something much bigger. It was a Tuesday night when it happened. I remember exactly because I had just watched my favorite TV show, the one about home improvement. I was alone, as I had been most nights since my mother left. The clock on the wall said 9:47 p.m. It's funny how certain details are engraved in our memory. The house was particularly quiet that night. The only sound was the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. I had just gotten up to get a glass of water when I felt it, a pressure on my chest so intense it made my knees buckle. It can't be a heart attack, I thought. I'm too young for that. But the pain only increased. It was as if someone was squeezing my heart with an iron fist. I tried to reach for the phone on the coffee table, but my movements felt sluggish, like I was moving underwater. The last thing I remember was the sound of the glass falling and shattering on the floor. Then came that feeling. How can I explain it? It was as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off gravity. Suddenly, I was floating above my own body. The scene below me felt surreal. I was lying on the beige couch, one arm hanging out, shards of glass scattered across the floor. The strangest thing was that he wasn't afraid. It was as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if a part of me always knew it was possible. "Am I dead?" I asked out loud, although there was no one to answer. My voice sounded different there. It wasn't really a sound, but more like a thought reverberating in the space around me. I tried to touch my body, but my hands or whatever they were now, went straight through it. It was at that moment that I noticed something even stranger. I could see through the walls of the house. It was as if physical limits had lost their meaning. I could see the backyard, the silent street. Even the stars in the sky seemed closer and brighter, and then came that light. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It wasn't coming from any specific place. It was as if the entire space around me was turning into light. It was golden, but not just golden. It had shades of colors that I can't even describe. colors that don't exist in our world. I felt a gentle pull, as if that light was calling me. There was no fear. There was no doubt. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt absolute peace. It was as if every bit of anxiety, every ounce of sadness had been dissolved by that light. Is this how it happens? I thought to myself. It's so peaceful. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. I can't tell if it was seconds or hours that I stayed there, floating between my body and that light that called me. The only thing I was sure of was that something extraordinary was about to happen. Before I could fully process what was happening, I felt a movement, not physical, but as if my consciousness was being gently pulled somewhere else. The room, my body, everything began to disappear in a whirlwind of light and sensation. "Let go," I heard a soft voice say. It wasn't a voice that came from outside, but seemed to come from within myself, and that's exactly what I did. I gave myself over to that movement, without resistance, without fear, just curiosity and a deep peace that I had never experienced before. How can we describe something that defies all earthly references we have? It's like trying to explain the colors of the rainbow to someone who has never seen colors. But I will try, even though I know that words will never do justice to what I experienced. The transition was smooth. One moment I was in that whirlpool of light. The next I found myself in a place that, well, calling it a garden is putting it down too much, but it's the closest word I can find. The ground beneath my feet, although I didn't exactly feel like I had feet, was like a living carpet of grass that gave off its own light. Each leaf seemed to pulse with its own energy, creating ripples of emerald light that spread with each movement. The flowers. Oh, the flowers. Imagine roses that emit music when they open, lilies that seem made of liquid light, orchids whose petals change color as you look at them. There were flowers in shapes I had never seen on Earth. Some looked like living crystals. Others were like small miniature galaxies. And the colors. It wasn't just colors that we saw with our eyes. It was as if we could feel colors, as if each tone had its own music, its own scent, its own emotion. The sky above wasn't blue. It was like a slow-moving kaleidoscope, with hues that went beyond the spectrum we know. Sometimes, shapes that looked like angels passed by, leaving trails of golden light in the air. "It's so alive," I whispered, and my voice sounded like music. It was then that I felt that familiar presence. Before I even turned around, I knew who it was. Her perfume, that mix of jasmine and vanilla that she loved so much, reached me. But now it was as if the aroma had a life of its own. Mother, and there she was, not as I saw her in her final days, consumed by depression and pain, but radiant, young, wearing that blue dress covered in silver sequins that she loved so much. The sequins didn't just reflect light, they seemed to capture little pieces of eternity in each sparkle. "Cassidy, my girl," she smiled, and her smile was like seeing the sunrise after a year of darkness. She ran, no, she practically danced, towards a playground that seemed to be made of crystallized light. There were swings that floated without ropes, slides that seemed to be made of solidified rainbows, and a carousel that rotated gently, emitting music that seemed to come from the very essence of the universe. "Come," she called, laughing like a child. "Isn't it wonderful?" I tried to run to her, but I moved as if I were in a dream. Each step seemed to take me through different layers of reality. The air around us was full of tiny specks of light dancing like cosmic fireflies. "Mom, I'm so sorry," I started to say, thinking about our last argument, but she just shook her head, her smile even brighter. "There's nothing to feel, darling. There's no regret here, no guilt, just love." She reached out her hand to me, and when our fingers touched, it was as if all the love we had ever shared multiplied infinitely. I could feel every happy moment we had together, every hug, every laugh, not as memories, but as if they were all happening at the same time, in an eternal present. "Are you happy here?" I asked, although the answer was obvious in her every move. "Happiness is a small word for it, Aunt Cassidy," she replied, twirling in her sparkling dress. "Here we are what we really are, without pain, without fear, without the limitations we carried." As I watched her play in that heavenly playground, I understood something profound about death. It was not an end, but a transformation, a liberation. My mother wasn't just fine. She was in a state of joy that transcended any earthly concept of happiness. It was at that moment that I noticed other presences approaching. beings of light that seemed to have been there the whole time, just waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And as he approached, he knew he was about to learn even more about this extraordinary place. As I watched my mother in the heavenly playground, I noticed the air around us began to change. It was as if space itself was becoming denser with light. It was then that they appeared. 3 beings that defy all earthly description. They were not exactly people, nor exactly angels as we imagine them. They were more like columns of conscious light. Each of them seemed to have its own luminous signature. The first emanated a golden tone that pulsed like a cosmic heart. The second had a silvery quality that reminded me of moonlight on a clear night. The third, well, its light was constantly changing, like a living aurora borealis. "Don't be afraid, Cassidy," the golden being said. Although no words were spoken in the traditional sense, it was more like his thoughts turned into direct understanding in my mind. "I'm not scared," I replied, surprised by the truth in my words. "It's like I already know you." The silver being emitted something that felt like a smile. "We have always been with you, Cassidy. With all of you. We are what you would call guardians." I realized I could see through them. It was like looking into a waterfall of light that contained all the possibilities of the universe. Within their luminous forms, I glimpsed galaxies being born and dying, entire civilizations developing, the entire cycle of existence happening simultaneously. "Why am I here?" I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. The third being, the one of changing light, approached. When he spoke, his voice was like crystallized music. "There is something you need to see, something you need to understand." I looked at my mother one last time. She waved with a calm smile, as if to say, "It's going to be okay," before following the beings of light. We moved in a way that was impossible to describe in physical terms. It was as if we were slipping through the very layers of reality. We approached a structure that seemed to be made of pure crystal, but that constantly changed shape, as if responding to our thoughts. The walls were simultaneously transparent and filled with impossible reflections. One moment we could see through them into infinity. The next they showed fractal patterns that seemed to contain all the secrets of the universe. "What is this place?" I asked, marveling at the way the light danced through the structure. The golden being replied, "It's a place of truth, Cassidy. A place where the veil between what is and what can be becomes thinner. Some of you call it the Temple of Knowledge," added the silver being. "Others know it as the Library of the Soul. The names are many, but the purpose is single." As we entered the structure, I felt a change in the atmosphere. The air, if we can call it that, became thicker with meaning. Each breath seemed to bring not only life energy but also understanding. The being of shifting light made a gesture, again, not a physical gesture, but something that altered the very reality around us, and an opening appeared before us. Through it, I could see a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, its walls covered in what resembled living mirrors. "Here," said the golden being, "you will see what you need to see. But remember, not everything shown is definitive. The future is a river with many tributaries." I felt a shiver of anticipation, if we can call a shiver a sensation that runs not only through the body, but through the very essence of being. I knew I was about to experience something that would fundamentally change my understanding of reality. The hallway seemed to stretch infinitely, but somehow we arrived instantly at our destination, a circular space where the walls were formed by a single continuous mirror. It was no ordinary mirror. Its surface rippled like silver water, and occasionally sparks of colored light danced across it. "Come closer," the being of golden light instructed, his voice echoing not in space but within my own consciousness. When I took a step forward, the surface of the mirror began to transform. It was like watching high-definition television, except you didn't just see the images, you lived them. The first scene that appeared took my breath away. It was me, around 5 years old, sitting on my mother's lap while she read Where the Wild Things Are. "Look at the funniest animal, Cassidy," my mother said in her memory, pointing to one of the illustrations. "I could smell your perfume, the warmth of your hug, the soft texture of your favorite sweater." The scene started to flow more quickly. My 10th birthday, when she made that chocolate cake that collapsed in the middle but was still the best cake I've ever eaten. The day I got my first bicycle, high school graduation, with her crying with pride in the front row. "These are the memories you carry," the silver being explained. "But notice how different they are now." And they were. Somehow I could see every moment not just from my perspective but from hers as well. I could feel the immense love she felt, her hopes, her fears, her dedication. It was overwhelming, but then the mirror darkened, and a new image began to form. It was me, older, driving a car on a rainy night. I could see the tiredness in my eyes, the deep circles under my eyes, the expression of concern. "What is this?" I asked, although something inside me already knew the answer. "A possibility," replied the being of changing light. "One of the many paths your future can take." In the image, my eyes were beginning to close with tiredness. The car swerved slightly to the right. Then, in a terrifying instant, he left the road. Glass shattered, metal twisted. The scene was so vivid that you could feel the impact, hear the deafening sound of the collision. Is this going to happen?" I asked, feeling something approaching fear for the first time since arriving in this place. "The future is not a book already written, Cassidy," said the golden being, his light pulsing gently. "It's a garden of forking paths. Every choice you make creates new paths, new possibilities." The mirror changed again, showing the same night, but this time I stopped the car at a gas station, decided to have a coffee, rest a little. The accident did not happen. "Then why show me this?" I asked. "Because you need to understand the power of your choices," replied the silver being. "Every decision, no matter how small it may seem, can change not only your destiny, but that of many others." The mirror began to show the ramifications of both futures. In the first, the accident affected not just me, but created waves of pain and change in the lives of dozens of people. In the second, small acts of kindness and connection created their own ripples, touching lives in ways I could never have imagined. "Are you telling me I can change the future?" The being of shifting light approached, its aurora borealis of colors dancing more intensely. "We are saying that you are already changing the future, every moment, with every choice. The question is, what kind of waves do you want to create in the ocean of existence?" I was silent for a moment, watching the infinite possibilities dance on the mirror's surface. It was like seeing a kaleidoscope of possible lives, each with its own set of joys and challenges. "There is more you need to see," the golden being said, and with a smooth movement, the images in the mirror began to change again, preparing me for the next revelation. The beings of light led me along a new path that seemed to form as we advanced. The air around us grew thicker and thicker with an energy that made my soul vibrate at a different frequency. That's when we arrived at an open space that seemed to have no ceiling or walls, just infinite light in all directions. In the center of this space, there was something I can only describe as a liquid light source. It was a circular structure that resembled a clear glass bathtub, but the glass seemed alive, pulsing with a glow of its own. Inside it, a substance that looked like water, but glowed as if millions of stars were dissolved in it. And there was my mother, standing at the edge of this fountain, still wearing her sparkling blue dress. His face had a serene expression that I never saw during his earthly life. "Mom," I called, and she turned to me with a smile so radiant that it seemed to light up the entire space around us. "Cassidy, darling," she said, her voice sounding like music. "I'm so glad you can see this." The being of golden light spoke softly. "This is the purification process. Each soul goes through it in its own time." "Is it painful?" I asked, remembering all the suffering my mother had experienced in life. My mother laughed, a crystalline sound that seemed to make the air itself dance. "No, my love. It's like taking a shower after a really long day. It's freeing." She approached the edge of the fountain and touched the surface of the luminous water with her fingertips. Wherever she touched, waves of light spread out in complex and beautiful patterns. "See," said the being of silver light, "each wave carries the memories and experiences of your mother. Every moment of joy, every tear shed, every hug shared, everything is being transformed into pure light." I watched in fascination as my mother began to enter the fountain. As the luminous water touched her body, her dress seemed to merge with the light, and her very form began to glow more brightly. "Don't be afraid for me, Cassidy," she said, sensing my apprehension. "You know that wonderful feeling when you dive into a pool on a hot summer day. It's like that multiplied by infinity." The being of changing light approached me. "Watch carefully. This is a sacred moment." As my mother sank deeper, I began to see something extraordinary happening. Every difficult moment in his life, the depression, the physical pain, The accumulated sorrows seemed to dissolve into the luminous water, transforming into pure golden light. All suffering has a purpose, explained the golden being. Even the most painful experiences are transformed into wisdom and love in this process. It was then that I felt an even greater presence manifesting around us. It was as if all of space had become conscious, alive with a love so immense I could barely comprehend its magnitude. "What is this?" I whispered, even though I already knew somehow. "It's universal love," replied the silver being. "Some call it God, others the source, or cosmic consciousness. The names are many, but the essence is one." My mother was now almost completely submerged in the luminous water. His face glowed with indescribable peace and joy. "Cassidy," she called, her voice now seeming to come from all directions. "Always remember, love never dies. It just changes form." As I watched my mother undergo this sacred transformation, I understood something fundamental about the nature of existence. Death was not an end. It was a passage, a transformation, a return to our true essence of light and love. Returning to my body after that first experience was like trying to put the ocean in a glass of water. The feeling was of tightness, of limitation. I opened my eyes and saw myself on the sofa in my living room, exactly where I had started. The clock on the wall read 22:15. Only 28 minutes had passed, although it felt like I had lived an eternity. The months that followed were a period of adaptation. How do you continue living a normal life after experiencing the extraordinary? I went back to work, continued my routine, but something inside me had fundamentally changed. The colors seemed duller, the sounds less vibrant compared to what I had experienced on the other side. It was on a Thursday in October that everything happened again. The day was particularly stressful at the office. Richard, my boss, had overwhelmed me with last-minute reports. "I need all of this by tomorrow, Cassidy," he had said, dumping a stack of documents on my desk at 4:30 in the afternoon. "But Richard, I already have 3 urgent projects." I tried to argue. "Well, now there are 4, he replied dryly, already turning to leave. I stayed at the office late, my eyes burning as I stared at the computer screen. When I finally left, it was already past 9 p.m. The night was cold. A light drizzle was falling on Austin, leaving the street slippery and shiny under the streetlights. I remember thinking I should have ordered an Uber. I was exhausted, and that scene from the mystical mirror, from the car accident, briefly flashed through my mind. But I dismissed the thought. "It's just a short ride home," I told myself. The first signs that something was wrong came when I noticed that my eyes felt too heavy. I turned on the radio, opened the window, letting the cold air in, trying to stay alert. But it was like fighting an invisible force that was pulling my eyelids down. "Just 10 more minutes," I muttered to myself. That's when it happened. One moment I was struggling to keep my eyes open. The next the car was sliding off the track. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The steering wheel slipping out of my hands, the sound of the tires skidding on the wet asphalt, the impact, the sound of the collision was deafening, but it only lasted for an instant. Then came silence. A silence so profound that it seemed to have its own weight. And then again, that familiar feeling of detachment. This time the transition was different. There was no pain, no fear, just a sense of spiritual déjà vu. I found myself floating above the scene of the accident. My car had crashed into a tree on the side of the road. The headlights were still on, cutting through the darkness with distorted beams. That's when he appeared, a being of light different from those he had encountered before. This one had a more defined, almost human shape, with long hair that looked like it was made of strands of liquid gold, and eyes so deep blue they seemed to contain entire galaxies. "Welcome back, Cassidy," he said, his voice sounding like heavenly music. "My name is Azrael." He reached out his hand to me, a hand that seemed to be made of condensed light. "There's more you need to see," he said. "Are you ready?" I looked at the accident scene one last time. I could already hear sirens in the distance. Will I survive? Azrael smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the entire night. "Your earthly journey is not yet over, Cassidy. But before you return, there are some truths you need to understand." I took his hand, and instantly, the world around us began to transform. Austin's rainy night disappeared, giving way to a path made of silvery light that stretched through what seemed to be the very fabric of the universe. As we walked down that road of light with Azrael, I began to notice shadows moving at the edges of my vision. These were no ordinary shadows. They were like holes in the light itself, distorted shapes that seemed to suck in the light around them. "What are they?" I asked, instinctively moving closer to Azrael. "Souls who have not yet found their way," he replied, his voice filled with compassion, trapped in their own fears and regrets. One of the shadows moved close enough that I could see its shape more clearly. It was vaguely human, but distorted by pain and suffering. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt an overwhelming wave of sadness and regret. "Can't we help them?" I asked, my heart aching at the sight. "Each soul must find its own path to the light," Azrael explained. "But watch." As he spoke, a light began to intensify in front of us. It was unlike any light I had ever seen before. It was not just bright. It was alive, conscious, charged with a love so intense that it seemed to fill every atom of the space around us. The shadows began to retreat, some trembling, others making sounds that seemed like distant laments, and then he appeared. I don't know how to describe that moment, how to explain the inexplicable. How can we put into earthly words something that completely transcends our ability to understand? Jesus was not like the paintings we see in churches. His presence was simultaneously simpler and more majestic than any artistic representation could capture. Its light was so intense it should have been blinding, but instead it seemed to heal something inside me that I didn't even know was hurt. "Welcome, daughter," he said, and his voice was like 1,000 symphonies playing in perfect harmony, like the sound of love itself. If love could have a sound. I fell to my knees, not out of fear or forced reverence, but because my legs simply couldn't support me in the face of so much love, so much truth. "Get up, Cassidy," he said gently. "There's a lot you need to see." With one gesture, the space around us transformed. We begin to see scenes from the world, wars, famine, violence, but also acts of love, sacrifice, and compassion. "See," he said, "how humanity walks the knife's edge between light and darkness." The images kept flowing. Children crying in war zones, refugees crossing dangerous seas, but also people helping each other, sharing what little they had, saving lives. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. "Because every choice matters," he replied. "Every act of love, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to change the world. Every gesture of kindness is a light that helps dispel the darkness." He approached, and I felt an indescribable warmth emanating from his presence. "You were created to love each other," he continued. "This is the simplest and most profound truth in the universe. But look what they did with this gift." New images emerged. People using religion to justify hatred, greed destroying the planet, indifference allowing millions to suffer needlessly. "But there is still hope," he said, and his voice carried a certainty that made my heart vibrate. "There is always hope, as long as there is love." Then he did something that surprised me. He reached out his hands and held mine. The moment we touched, it was as if all the love in the universe flowed through me. I saw every person I ever met, every life I touched, every moment I made a difference, no matter how small. "Do you understand now?" he asked, even though he knew I already understood. "Each of you carries a spark of the divine. Each has the power to be a beacon of light in the darkness." Still holding my hands, Jesus began to show me something different, visions of the approaching future. It was like watching a movie in all directions simultaneously, each scene loaded with deep meaning. "What you are about to see," he said, "is a pivotal moment in human history." The images began to form more clearly. I saw the world as it is today, with its contradictions and conflicts, but then something started to change. It was like seeing a sunrise at accelerated speed. "On November 1st, 2024, he continued, his voice ringing not just in my ears but in every fiber of my being, "a portal will open." "A portal?" I asked, trying to understand. "Not like you imagine in your science fiction movies." He smiled, and his smile contained all the wisdom of the universe. "It is a portal of consciousness, a fundamental shift in the vibrational frequency of the earth and all its inhabitants." The visions became more intense. I saw people around the world experiencing mass spiritual awakening. It was as if an invisible wave of light was sweeping across the planet, touching every soul, every heart. "Some will embrace this change," he explained, showing me scenes of people coming together, helping each other, developing spiritual gifts they didn't even know they had. Others will resist. I also saw the other side, people struggling with this transformation, holding on to fear, Anger, old patterns of thinking and behavior. Will it be like a great awakening? I asked. It will be like a new dawn for human consciousness, he replied. But as with every dawn, some creatures will prefer to remain in the darkness. The images kept flowing. I saw communities forming based on principles of love and cooperation. I saw technologies being developed in harmony with nature. I saw people discovering healing and communication skills that seemed miraculous. But there will also be challenges, he warned, showing me scenes of conflict and resistance. Transformation is never easy. Many will fear these changes. How can we prepare? I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility in every word. Opening your hearts, he replied simply. Love is the key to this transition. Not the romantic or superficial love that you value so much in your stories, but true, unconditional love that transcends all barriers. He then showed me something that left me speechless. I saw how every small act of kindness, every gesture of true love, created waves of light that spread through the fabric of reality, affecting not only our physical world, but also dimensions we can't even reach. To understand, and every choice you make, he explained, every moment you choose love over fear, understanding over judgment, compassion over indifference, helps pave the way for this transformation. I saw ordinary people, teachers, doctors, salespeople, cleaners, each contributing in their own way to this change, often without even realizing the impact of their actions. No need to be special, he smiled, reading my thoughts. Each soul has its role in this great transformation. Some will be shining beacons, others will be small candles, but every light is important. Every light makes a difference. The vision began to slowly dissipate, but before it disappeared completely, he added, Remember, Cassidy, the future is not written in stone. What you saw are possibilities, beautiful possibilities, but it is up to each of you to transform them into reality. I woke up in the hospital 3 days after the accident. The first thing I saw was the worried face of my Aunt Margaret. Yes, the same aunt my mother wanted to live with before she left. She held my hand and cried silently. I thought we lost you too, she whispered when she realized I was awake. There was something different in her eyes. She was sober, something I hadn't seen in years. The doctors said it was a miracle that I survived. The car was completely destroyed, and according to the laws of physics, I should have had much more serious injuries. But there I was, with just a few broken ribs and several bruises. You were very lucky, Dr. Peterson said during one of his visits. Someone up there must really like you. If he only knew. The days in the hospital gave me time to process everything I had experienced. How do you return to normal life after having experienced the extraordinary? How do you get through your days knowing that there is so much more beyond the veil of reality as we know it? At first, I thought I would share my experience with everyone. I wanted to scream to the world about what I had seen, about what was to come. But I soon realized that this was not the way. Some truths need to be whispered, not shouted. I returned to work after 6 weeks. Richard, my boss, was different to me, kinder, more understanding. I found out later that he had also recently lost someone, and my accident made him rethink a lot of things. No need to rush, he told me on the first day. Take your time. It's funny how life goes on. Even after experiences that seem too big to fit into the daily routine, I still wake up early, I still pay bills, I still worry about mundane things. But now, there is an added dimension to everything I do. When I go to the supermarket, for example, I find myself observing people with different eyes. I see your inner lights, even if they are dim or clouded by worries and fears. Sometimes a simple smile or kind word can make that light shine a little brighter. I didn't create any study groups. I didn't write books. I didn't become a spiritual guru. I'm still just Cassidy, the same person I've always been, but at the same time, completely different. Some nights I sit on the porch of my house and look at the stars. I remember the heavenly garden, my mother's purification, the encounter with Jesus. I think about what's coming, this great awakening that's coming. I feel a mixture of expectation and serenity. Many people ask me if I'm afraid of the future, especially when I mention the changes that are coming. The truth is no. How can you be afraid when you have already experienced a love so immense that it transcends all understanding? Last night, I was organizing some old things and I found that cross that my mother was holding in her last moments. Sitting there, holding that object so simple and so full of meaning, I felt that loving presence again that I experienced on the other side. It's coming, a soft voice whispered in my heart. It was not a voice of warning or fear, but of hope and promise. When people ask me what to expect on November 1st, 2024, I simply answer, open your hearts. Love is the key to everything that is to come. I don't know exactly what this awakening, this transformation, will be like, but I know that every small act of love we perform today helps pave the way. Every smile, every gesture of kindness, every moment of understanding and forgiveness is like a small light turning on in the darkness. What about my mother? Sometimes, when the wind blows a certain way, or when I see a bluebird in the garden, I feel its presence, not with that excruciating pain of longing, but with the serene joy of someone who knows that love transcends all barriers, even death. I continue living my life, one day at a time, trying to be a little better today than I was yesterday, and I await, with an open heart and full of hope, the dawn of a new era for humanity, because now I know, with a certainty that goes beyond all doubt, that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and that each of us, no matter how ordinary or insignificant it may seem, has an important role to play in this great transformation to come.